Everyone, we are in the second class of the Skokie Valley Modern Orthodoxy series. This is not happening before a live audience, so you'll have to imagine that we're all together in the class, which did happen live on Monday night, but was not recorded. So I'm re-recording. Rav Ari last week discussed the encounter of Judaism with the world. 99.9% of the galaxy is not Jewish. Uh, Either the people themselves are not Jewish or the larger physical world, the world of knowledge, is not Jewish. And he showed that since time immemorial, Judaism has been thinking about this, has been grappling with this, starting with Abraham, starting with Abraham Avinu, who was told to start this new path, to start this new way, and yet at the same time to be a bracha, v'hyeh bracha, to be a blessing to the whole world. Today we are going to look at Judaism's encounter with modernity, where this question of how we deal with the outside world comes roaring to life in a totally new way. Modernity, modernity, modern orthodoxy. What are these terms? What are we doing here is really what we're asking. What are we doing here at Skokie Valley? What are we doing here in modern orthodoxy? So let's start with what is modernity. We live modernity, so we often don't even think about or become aware of what it is because it is so much the warp and woof of the lives we live. And yet, for 95% of human history, the way that we live would have seemed shocking. Even the fact that I'm addressing you right now through a video, through a Zoom class, would be incomprehensible to most of our ancestors. To understand modernity a little better, to bring out some of the newness, the shock, the confusion that it engendered in our people and in all people who experienced it, I'd like to take a look at a source drawn from literature. One of my favorite authors, Charles Dickens. A good place to start. Charles Dickens, in his great work Bleak House, wrote the following, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend reading some Dickens. I haven't finished Bleak House, but you'll forgive me for still quoting it. I've read the beginning, and it's a great beginning. London, implacable November weather, as much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. And it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. As I read, think about where modernity has seeped into literature, seeped into the images that Dickens is using. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general infection of ill temper and losing their foothold at street corners, where tens of thousands have been slipping and sliding since the day broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud and accumulating at compound interest. Fog everywhere, fog up the river where it flows, fog down the river where it rolls. Defiled among the tears of shipping and the waterside pollutions of a great and dirty city, gas looming through the fog in diverse places in the streets. We drove slowly, I'm skipping ahead, through the dirtiest and darkest streets that were ever seen in the world, and in such a distracting state of confusion that I wondered how the people kept their senses, until we passed in sudden quietude under an old gateway, and drove on through a silent square until we came to an odd nook in a corner, where there was an entrance up a steep, broad flight of stairs, like an entrance to a church. And there really was a churchyard outside under some cloisters, for I saw the gravestones from the staircase window. Why are we reading Dickens in a shiur on modern orthodoxy? Because I think if you read this opening of Bleak House carefully, you'll see that modernity has begun to seep in to life, into the way that Dickens is writing, and we get some of the symbols of what this transformation meant. So first of all, let's go through and just note some of those changes and some of those symbols. It's very muddy, and there's a lot of fog everywhere. What's that fog? That fog is from pollution. That fog is from the waterside pollution of the great and dirty city. It's the Industrial Revolution, which has hit London. There's smokestacks. We're producing new technologies like gangbusters. And on the one hand, it's amazing. It's raising our quality of life. On the other hand, it's shocking. It's confusing. It's not great. It's making our health worse. as we breathe in the pollution, the fog. And in this sense, modernity is a great fog, very confusing symbolically. It's fog is a good metaphor for the arrival of modernity. But on a more specific note, also notice we might meet a megalosaurus. Megalosaurus, that's a new word. That comes from the advent of archaeology, of debates about the history of the earth. The beginnings of evolution are coming now. The discussion of evolution, the dethronement of humans, questioning biblical stories that seem simple and now are suddenly complex. Judaism, I argue, always thought they were complex, the creation stories, but certainly Christianity did not, and certain voices in Judaism also took those stories literally. Um, the mud is accumulating at compound interest. Compound interest, banking, capitalism has arrived. Compound interest, fine, was always part of human history, but it's widespread adoption, part of modernity. We have industry, we have gas, new technologies, artificial light. The way people are living is changing. They're staying up later. They're moving into cities, into London. There's thousands and thousands of people moving to London. They're not farmers. They're not living in ghettos. If they're Jews, they're starting to move out of the ghetto. And that's one of the greatest revolutions, developments of modernity for Jews is the E word, emancipation. Jews suddenly have rights. We have rights for the first time ever in most countries. We have rights. We're given citizenship. We are allowed to flee the ghetto, to join business, industry, to be culturally German, French, English. This is a shock to the system, and so many Jews run for the exits. They leave Jewish life, they convert, they secularize, they stop being proud of their Judaism, they look at it as superstitious. They don't want to listen to rabbis anymore, certainly not traditional Orthodox rabbis. And that change is an earthquake. Finally, they drove through the dark streets in a state of confusion. And that, again, the fog, the state of confusion, that is modernity for so many people. And notice this, the very end, he says, we passed in sudden quietude under an old gateway. They reach this little nook where things are a little calmer. And he says, maybe it's a church. Oh, maybe it's not. But actually, when I look out from this building, I see there is a church next door, but it's actually a graveyard. It's a graveyard. And I can't think of a better artistic rendering of religion and modernity. Is it a place of quiet, away from the confusion? Is it wrapped up in the confusion and the fog? Is it alive or is it dead? Is it a graveyard? These are questions that Judaism faces in modernity, that Orthodox Judaism is going to wrestle with. How do we stay alive in a time of change when old forms are being overthrown? Do we enter the fog? Do we throw ourselves into the fog, into the confusion, or do we run away from it and retreat behind church or synagogue walls? How do we deal with the fugue and the fog of modernity? We're going to look a little bit at those questions today. First, by looking at three major responses to modernity in Judaism, and basically reform, fundamentalize, i.e. Haredi Judaism, or synthesis, modern Orthodoxy. And then we'll look at some of the differences between those latter two, Haredi Judaism, modern Orthodoxy. And we'll look at four major planks or beliefs, values that I think are important to modern Orthodoxy. We can't cover it all. We can't cover all modern Orthodoxy in a half hour, but we will hit on some of the greatest hits of this great wrestling with the fog of modernity. And last but not least, I just have to add, I have just done something incredibly modern Orthodox. We started a source sheet with Charles Dickens. That is a modern Orthodox thing to do. If you show this to a rabbi 150 years ago or 200 years ago, they would say, why in the world are you putting a secular literary leader, a Christian, on a source sheet? And furthermore, what is a source sheet? They didn't have source sheets. Source sheets are a product of a modern technology, photocopiers and computers and democratized learning. we're learning men and women together in this class. That's new. That's modern Orthodox. And the fact that we put Dickens on at all is because I think there's great value, a lot to learn, and even something sacred potentially in some of the great art, some of the great thinkers of our world who may not be Jewish. That is modern Orthodox. And yet, we're doing this in a sheer. We are from Jews. We are Jews who believe in certain tenets and live our lives by Torah. But we also read Dickens. That is modern Orthodoxy. So let's dive in a little bit more to the details here. There's three stages that you can identify of modern Orthodoxy as we look a little bit at the history here. Alan Brill says the three stages that he identifies are the Enlightenment, um, modernism, and late modernity. And I just want you to keep these in mind as we look at the next few sources, because the Enlightenment is really when this all gets started. This is the earthquake. The Enlightenment is when people like Jean Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Hobbes are revolutionizing politics, when scientists, Newton and Leibniz and others, are starting to revolutionize the understanding of the natural world, science, and much more, of course, changes in art and the overthrow of old forms, old authorities, the French Revolution and the American Revolution, two revolutionary responses to the Enlightenment that those values are filtering out into the general culture, throwing off old superstitions, throwing off maybe a shtetl mindset. That's the Enlightenment. Then we go, that's 1800s, 1700s. In the 1900s, in the 20th century, we get high modernism, which is technology has come into its own. The Industrial Revolution has matured. It's not just a few smokestacks. It is society in the West. And expertise, the space age, expertise, scientists become very important. We get figures like Rav Soloveitchik, whereas in the Enlightenment period, we get figures like Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Finally, we have late modernity. We're not going to talk as much about this because we're living it. Late modernity sees the breakdown, I would say, of high modern orthodoxy, less focus in some parts of our community on sort of the greatness of Dickens and Torah together, and perhaps more modern orthodoxy becomes about living a modern life, and also being orthodox. I think there's some loss in that shift, and I'm sort of painting with a broad brush here. We'll also talk a little bit about how we operate at Skokie Valley and how I think about these issues for myself. So those are three stages of modernity. And let's take a look at that first stage. In that first stage, I'm going to go with another rule of three. There are three responses to modernity that we're going to look at in depth. Reform. This is the impulse to say we're going to still be Jewish, but we're going to radically change our religion to match the mores, the morals, and the beliefs of modern society. We are going to do violence to the tradition in order to make it feel more palatable to moderns. Reform Judaism, to some extent, the Maskilim, the Haskalah, Enlightenment Judaism, there are different figures in that movement, but many of them are doing violence to the tradition also. They try to adapt it, getting rid of all those annoying things like kashrut and tefillin, and the rituals are seen as old and unscientific, unnecessary. And just one figure, we're going to talk about different figures here. So I'll give you one figure from Reform Judaism in America, Rabbi David Einhorn, who is pretty radical, says the Talmud has no divine basis, wants to kind of ignore Talmud and get rid of the ritual, most of the rituals of Judaism, the mitzvot that aren't ethical in his mind. Let's take the greatest hits of Jewish ethics. That's how we're going to live. And he, obviously, I terribly disagree with that approach. And I think it was not both strategic, obviously on a religious and moral level of what God wants from him, I think it's terrible, but also on a strategic level, early Reform Jews, many of them assimilated, they outmarried and were lost to Judaism. This seemingly didn't work on a Jewish continuity level, at minimum. I do want to say, though, I have some respect for David Einhorn. David Einhorn took that ethics thing very seriously, and he was run out of town on a rail. He was tarred and feathered, I believe, after he gave a drasha in Maryland to his shul in which he denounced slavery after an Orthodox rabbi in New York had praised slavery. This is in 1861 as the Civil War is about to heat up. And he paid the price. That was bravery. That shows that he did take ethics seriously. And that is something I think to admire about some of these reformers. I do have great respect for many Reform Jews, and I think Reform Judaism is not what it was in 1850. It's changed and moderated a lot, at least at the leadership level. But the crowning moment, of course, of the separation in America of Reform Judaism from all the other flavors of non-Haredi Judaism was the Treifa banquet. Treifa banquet, many of you have heard of in the 1880s, where they decide they're going to make a big statement at their Reform ordination ceremony, and they have, or Reform, I'm sorry, the Reform seminary has a dinner. And they serve not just like little shrimp here and there. They go all out. It's clams and shrimp. But this is the menu: clam, shrimp, sweetbreads. They got crabs. They got everything. So they really they make their point. And this, of course, shocks and horrifies those who are also in America, who are Jewish and trying to figure out a way of being Jewish in America. Reform is not the path that we take, needless to say. There's another path that we don't take, and that's the emergence of the Haredi world. The key figure in the Haredi response, the emergence of Haredi Judaism, is the Chasam Sofer, who says, Chadash Aser min HaTorah. Chadash is Aser from the Torah. What does that mean? Well, it comes from a random halacha that's totally unrelated to what he was saying. A halacha about not eating new grain before Pesach. If the grain is harvested before Pesach, you can't eat it. He takes this and he says, no, what it really means for our time is no innovation, nothing new from the Torah. Chadash Aser min Torah means the new is prohibited from the Torah. And basically, any innovations in halacha, in Torah, in the way that we dress, in the way that we act as Jews, is asur, is forbidden. That is the Haredi response to modernity. And I want to spend a moment on this because I think it's really important. Many in Judaism, modern Orthodox or otherwise, and Haredi, feel that Haredi Judaism is the authentic Judaism. And I want to offer to you in the next couple of moments that actually it is not the authentic Judaism, that modern Orthodoxy is just as authentic in its commitment to halacha. So what am I talking about? To understand what I'm talking about, I want to look at a map. I want to look at a map of Europe, and we're going to look at, let's go to Berlin, okay? Berlin, Western Europe, is the ground zero of the Enlightenment, of modernity in the 1800s. Paris, France, England. In Germany, this is where Jews are running for the doors of the ghettos, and they are assimilating and acculturating. So the response in Germany is going to be actually one of adaptation. The Orthodox community is going to try to adapt and show people they can be Jewish and they can also be part of the Enlightenment, part of modernity. Because if they try to become Haredi, try to wall it off, it's just not going to work. Too many people are leaving. So they're trying to figure out a middle way. How do we adapt? On the other hand, all the way over in Russia, in the Pale of Settlement, this is a very traditional area, a lot of Hasidus, small towns. The Enlightenment takes a long time to reach Russia. It'll get there eventually, but it's a very Orthodox, very traditional place. They are not reacting to modernity very much. They're kind of keeping on as they are. Eventually, we'll get socialism, etc. So in Russia, they're not so worried in the East about modernity. Um, in Germany, they're very worried and they're adapting. And ultra-Orthodoxy comes in Hungary. In Hungary is where Haredi Judaism emerges because they are right in the middle. They've got the winds of change from Germany, but they're pretty uh, traditional. Got a lot of traditionalists, and they've had some time to see what happened in Germany, and they don't want it to happen in Hungary. So they're going to try to radically put up walls and fight Reform Judaism, fight the Haskalah, the Enlightenment. This is where the Chasam Sofer, the great Hungarian posek, and his students make their stand. And so it makes a lot of sense geographically that ultra-Orthodoxy was started there. That's my understanding. I'm no historian, but I think it's helpful to look at the map. Um, and they have a shot in Hungary. They have a shot of stopping modernity, and they succeed to some extent. So what does that look like on the ground? The Chasam Sofer lays down this flag. Chadash is usher from the Torah, and it's his students who carry it further and say what that really means. So this moment in 1865 is a big one. They release a psak din. This is a ruling, a giant halachic ruling that a lot of rabbis sign on to, these proto-Haredi rabbis. They say in this psak din, which I've reproduced for you right here, they say here are 9 things that you cannot do in your shul. And if you do them, it's like yarag v'al yavo. You should die rather than go into those shuls. Those shuls are places of heresy and avodah zarah. What's so bad? What are these 9 things that they say you can't do? Here's one: asur li drosh drasha b'lashon umot haolam. You should only give drashas in Yiddish. You can't, or Hebrew. You can't give a drasha in German. You can't have the chazan wear special robes. That was very popular at the time. Can't do that. That's new. That's different. You can't get this. You can't have a wedding in a shul because the tradition among many Jews was to have weddings outside under the stars. Uh, it's just a minhag that I don't think even everyone followed, but this was seen as a terrible change. You can't have a see-through mechitza. And finally, you can't do any changes that are change the nature of the Beit Knesset, any change to the traditions that we've received from Avot Avotenu, from our fathers in the shul. So basically, the last one is just like don't change anything in the shul. These are big announcements, and this is a radical response to modernity. Let's see why. Let's see why I say that. Rabbi Azriel Hildesheimer is a big, big figure in the beginning of modern Orthodoxy. He's one of the first rabbis, probably the first, who says we're going to have a yeshiva, a school. We're going to teach Torah. We're also going to teach secular studies. So you could argue he and one other guy we'll talk about in a moment were the first sort of proto-modern Orthodox Jews. And he responds to this psak din with some other rabbis, and he says, just that it is not allowed to permit that which is forbidden. Similarly, it is not allowed to forbid that which is permitted, meaning you're not allowed to say that something is forbidden if it's not. You, as a rabbi, can't stand up and say, you're not allowed to eat salmon because it reminds me of lobster. You're not allowed to eat salmon. That would be asur. That would be asur. That would be forbidden because the Torah only forbade certain kinds of fish and forbids salmon. And he says, without a doubt, these great rabbis who made the psak din knew that in their region it is appropriate to establish a gezerah, meaning for them it works. They're in Hungary, fine. They need to do this in Hungary because in Hungary they're trying to stop modernity, and for their communities this works. But it doesn't work for my community. And where is Rev Azriel Hildesheimer? He's in Germany. He's in the ground zero of modernity. So he's got to make some changes. Otherwise, people aren't going to come to shul anymore. In other places and regions, he says, these rabbis have no power to issue such measures. Only the great court can do this. Only the Sanhedrin, only the rabbis of the Talmud could make up a new halacha like this and say it applies to everybody. Can't do that. And he says, We saw in our regions that the public cannot abide by these prohibitions, but they will lead to much greater loss than reward. He means that his congregants, his communities, they are assimilating. And if we don't make some changes, if we don't give them a chazan with a nice hat and some robes, if we don't adjust the mechitza a little bit, if we don't change certain minhagim, certain traditions, then we're going to be in trouble. He's not saying we should change halacha. We should change Torah level halachot. We should change rabbinic halachot. He's just saying, I want to be able to adapt a little bit to the emergency needs of this moment. Fine. But Rav Azriel Hillesheimer is seen as like he's a modern. He wants to adapt within Orthodoxy. What about just the centrists? What about the people at the time who were, let's say, kind of a young Israel or a Rav Herschel Schachter style person? Rav Herschel Schachter is the current Rosh Yeshiva of YU. Seen as sort of not a modernizer, more sort of right wing within modern Orthodoxy. What about those guys at the time? So let's look at one of them. His name was the Maharam Shik, great posek, still quoted today. And he says, in response to this psak din that you've never heard of, this is a big deal, this psak din in 1865, huge deal. And it wasn't just the Hildesimers, the liberalizers of Orthodoxy who were angry about it. The Maharam Shik was angry about it. He says, I saw their things which in my opinion were simply not true. Oh, the psak din, its things aren't true. He said, if one intends to issue an emergency prohibition, he is not permitted to claim that it is by force of halacha that it is forbidden. He can't say, you could say you can't eat salmon, but you have to explain that it's not that the Torah says you can't eat salmon. It's for whatever reason, you've decided that it's important to preserve Judaism. But he says, if a court says it's by force of halacha, as did this psak din, then according to the Rambam, it violates the injunction of you shall not add to it. He's talking about the mitzvah of Baal Tosif. The Torah says you cannot add to the Torah. You cannot add to the Torah. And he says they added to the Torah by saying that these things in their psak din are halacha. They argue these were deeply held halachot, and they didn't make them up. These are halachas, because that's Baal Tosif. At best, some of these things are minhagim or traditions, but they're not halachot. Some of them aren't even minhagim. They're just things that some people did. So he's very angry. And he reprimanded one of the authors, or one of these proto-Haredi guys, for his unequivocal assertion that a halachic prohibition was involved in preaching or listening to a German sermon. He says, it's okay to teach Torah in German. There's no prohibition on that. It's true. Most shuls haven't done that until now. But he says, I don't see any halachic problem with teaching in German. Strict adherence, this is now I'm going to quote to you from this article by Michael Silber, which I highly recommend, on the emergence of ultra-Orthodoxy. He says, strict adherence to halacha is usually viewed as the hallmark of ultra-Orthodoxy. Yet by its very nature, the halachic process, with its meticulous attention to the letter of the law, tended to constrain the impatient zealots of ultra-Orthodoxy. In convincing the Orthodox center to take a rigid, uncompromising stand on secular education, etc., the ultra-Orthodox faced the problem that these issues fell into gray areas that are not easily treated within the framework of halacha. The halacha was often too flexible or ambiguous, at times silent, or worse yet, embarrassingly lenient, which is why the center could not bring itself to legitimize the latter's often unorthodox means. So he calls the way that the ultra-Orthodox are doing halacha unorthodox. And here we come to the great, I think, lesson of this psak din and of early ultra-Orthodoxy, which we call Haredi Judaism. Haredi Judaism is a modern response. It's modern. It's a radical response to modernity. And the response is, we're going to take things that before were just minhagim, we're going to say they're like deoraisa level. They are Torah level. We're going to put up walls to the outside world, and we're going to not innovate within halacha at all. I'm not talking about changing even halacha. I'm saying just being creative, relying on some minority opinions here or there, being a little lenient. No, we're going to look for stringency, for chumrah every time. And this is a response to make sure that we don't give an inch to these new ideas, to modernity. And to some extent, it actually works. If you care just about Jewish continuity, the Haredi approach works. They maintain their communities, and their children do not assimilate, as do many of the Reform. But what I hope you take away from this is that modern Orthodoxy says, no, we're going to keep doing halacha. At minimum, we're going to keep doing it the way we've always done it. We might actually become more creative. We'll talk about that later. But we're not going to put up walls and we're not going to freeze halacha. That's what the yeshiva Haredi world does. And the Haredi world becomes the yeshiva world. A lot of nuances here. But we are going to put up these walls around the Torah, and any innovation is asur. So if people say to you that Haredi Judaism is more authentic, it's not. It's a understandable reaction to modernity, but the way it does halacha, at least as you can see in this moment in the 1860s, is it's not the way that we were doing halacha before then. Halacha has a lot of gray in it, a lot of ambiguity. That's not the way that they were making halacha. I also just want to note that I have great respect and love for our Haredi brothers and sisters. Some of my teachers came from that world or are still in that world. But I also believe in some halachic creativity, and I believe in interacting with the outside world and learning and seeing the greatness in Dickens, the greatness in science. Those are things that are more complicated or even forbidden in the Haredi world. And yes, I'm painting with a broad brush. All the caveats you can add to that, but so while I have respect, I also see things differently. Let's talk about modern orthodoxy. A few planks, a few values that come to the fore as we look at modern orthodoxy. First of all, how do we interact with secular knowledge? Suddenly, there's these vast vistas of secular knowledge that have become available to Jews in the 17 and 1800s. What are we going to do about that? Should we learn them? Should we interact with them? Are they forbidden? Are they even terrible? Should we leave that to the non-Jews, as the Haredi world does? Into that question comes Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, a great leader in, you guessed it, Germany, Berlin, and all around Germany. And he says we can learn secular studies. We can learn about the world. It's good. It's good to learn about the world. And he says we can go out into the world. The more Judaism comprises the whole of man and extends its mission to the salvation of the whole of mankind, the less it is possible to confine its outlook to the synagogue. He says he will become less aloof from art or science, culture, education, and he'll look forward to the ennoblement of man. So he says you can get out there. You can get out into society. He comes up with this tagline of Torah with derech eretz, Torah with the way of the world. You can get a job in secular society. You can be a German. Being a German doesn't mean that therefore you have to leave your Judaism. He's trying to find a middle path where you can go into German society. You can deal with emancipation, but you don't have to leave behind your Jewish identity and Torah. So he's really trying to give people an option for emancipation that doesn't involve assimilation. A lot of big words, emancipation, assimilation. So emancipate yourself. You can go out of the ghetto, stay Jewish. He wrote a great commentary on the Torah. And I'll just give you one little piece of that. On the pasuk in Vayikra that says you should walk in God's ordinances, statutes, in his chukot. He says, walking in them, he quotes a midrash that you should make them primary and not secondary. So Torah should be primary, everything else should be secondary. He says, what do we learn from this? That secondary stuff, that's the wisdom acquired from non-Jewish sources. And he says that what we can learn from this is that we are permitted to engage in other fields of wisdom. We can learn science. We can learn physics and astronomy. We can learn sociology and psychology. We can learn all these things, but make them secondary to Torah. Don't forget that Torah should be at the center. If you don't make Torah at the center, then we will lose our way because we're going to have too much cognitive dissonance. It's going to be too confusing. What he's saying is if you throw yourself into modernity whole cloth and you say, maybe psychology is just as worthy of study as Torah, and maybe it has more truth than Torah, so you're gonna lose your Judaism. So don't forget your priorities. But already this is radical because Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is saying, go out in the world. You don't have to be scared of the world. You don't have to be scared of secular knowledge. This reaches its pinnacle many decades later with the advent of what I call high modern orthodoxy. That is wrapped up in these figures, Rabbi Lamb, Rav Soloveitchik, Samuel Belkin. Here's the Rav. Here's Rav Soloveitchik. There is Norman Lamb and Rabbi Willig. I believe it's Saul Berman. These are big figures of 20th century modern orthodoxy. They believe not only that it's okay to go learn secular knowledge, but that there could be something even religious, sacred about it. They go beyond what Hirsch said in some sense. And they say Torah, faith, religious learning on one side, and Mada, science, worldly knowledge on the other, together offer us a more overarching and truer vision than either one set alone. So it says each one gives a view of the Creator. Each alone is true, but only partially true. Both together present the possibility of a larger truth. That is far beyond where Rav Hirsch went. So they say, when you encounter secular knowledge, actually, it's beautiful. There's Torah in secular knowledge. There's secular knowledge in Torah. We can put them in conversation. And together, they give us a view of creation of the Creator. And yet, we're still going to stick to Torah. He says, we're not going to compromise on a single piece of mitzvot, halacha, tradition. He thinks we can do it. We can go out in the world and really, we can get PhDs and see secular knowledge as one half of, the other half of Torah, and we can handle that, and we can stay Jewish. This is, again, we come back to Dickens in the source sheet. So we're going to look at a couple more values of modern orthodoxy. We've seen this one is sort of how do we interact with the outside knowledge, and what about society? How do we interact with society? Not just knowledge, but let's talk about how do we change or interact with our society now that we're emancipated. The Rav Soloveitchik, we'll come back to this photo, but Rav Soloveitchik says that we have a duty to make our societies, not just our Jewish society, the larger world, better. And he says we didn't do that as much in history because we were stuck in the ghetto, because the non-Jewish world didn't give us a chance to. As long as we were exposed to such a soulless, impersonal confrontation on the part of non-Jewish society, it was impossible for us to participate to the fullest extent in the great universal confrontation between man and the cosmic order. The limited role we played until modern times in the great cosmic confrontation was not of our choosing. We have always considered ourselves an inseparable part of humanity, and we were ever ready to accept the divine challenge, fill the earth and subdue it, and the responsibility implicit in human existence. What's he saying? This is so beautiful. He's saying we couldn't be captains of industry and leaders of science and improving the human condition until now because we weren't emancipated, because we were stuck. We weren't allowed full citizenship. Now that we are, we will do what is our mission, to make the world better. He says we have always considered ourselves an inseparable part of humanity, and we want to improve society. That's not so much a Haredi view. That's a modern Orthodox view. Haredi view is much more, we will do Torah. That is our tafki. That is our mission in this world. And the non-Jews, they'll worry about science and technology and politics. The Rav says, no, we have an obligation. We have a duty that goes all the way back to Avraham Avinu, which he talks about in this little essay here, to care about the common welfare, to care about the stranger, to care about our societies. I love this. I mean, this is such a key part of what it is to be a true modern Orthodox Jew. I also want to mention, as part of this, the revolution of liberalism. When I visited, uh, and by liberalism, I mean constitutional democracies, the rights of man, uh, governments chosen by the people, constrained by law. I'm not talking liberal conservative. When I visited Independence Hall with my wife, I felt that this is a holy place. This is a place where the Declaration of Independence was signed. A revolutionary act in human history that to me articulates the Jewish values contained in the Torah of all people constrained by law, all people equal before the law, Tzelem Elohim, the image of God in every human being, which means that we have to find a way to maximize honoring the Tzelem Elohim in every person. To me, that is democracy, that is liberalism, and that had its dawn, in some sense, in reality, at Independence Hall in 1776. Liberal democracies have been very good to Jews and to modern Orthodox Jews, and to Haredi Jews for that matter. It's allowed us to practice through freedom of religion the way that we would like. And the great articulator of this is Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who we're not going to read it, but he says basically the form of politics that's closest to Judaism is liberal democracy. He articulates this in a very beautiful way. One other figure I'll just mention that has inspired me is Sabato Mores. Sabato Mores was a little-known Italian rabbi who actually played a big role in America in the 1800s as a proto-modern Orthodox Jew. He helped start JTS before JTS became conservative when it was still Orthodox. And he was trying to find this middle path also. As an Italian, Sephardic kind of rabbi, a way of merging his American identity with his Judaism, out assimilating. And he articulates, as he says, with the spangled banner of liberty in one hand and the law of Horeb in the other, we will continue faithful citizens of this glorious republic and constant adorers of the living God. I mean, this man could write. He was only a few years off the boat from Italy, and look how he's writing. And he's saying we can be constitutionalists. We can be believers in constitutional democracy and believers in Torah. We can do both. And there's no contradiction. This also, I'm not going to read it, but I found a drasha he gave the week Lincoln died. He was there. He was in America preaching already at a shul in Philadelphia when during the Civil War. He supported the Union. He loved Lincoln. And he talks in his drasha about how Pesach interacted with the Civil War. He was so excited that on Pesach was when the slaves had been freed and the Union was winning. And it's on Pesach that Lincoln is shot, and he ties the two together. That's something very modern Orthodox to do. This frum rabbi who's talking about Pesach and the freeing of the slaves, he's weaving together his society's travails, care for the slave, care for the Union with Torah. That is very modern Orthodox. Okay, so now we've talked about how we interact with secular knowledge, and then how we just talked about how we should be part of society. It's not enough just to learn about it. We have to go out into society, make it better, be good citizens, help our democracies. What about within Judaism? What about not just non-Jews who we're allowed to interact with under modern Orthodox belief, but what about non-Orthodox Jews? So the Haredi movement clearly says we're not interested. We're going to wall ourselves off. That's changed in more recent times to some extent. It's the Kiruv movement. Modern Orthodoxy, the great figure of pluralism within modern Orthodoxy is this guy, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who I am so grateful I got to learn from in yeshiva. He's still alive. He's one of the few people on this list who is, I think, the only one who's still alive. He's in his 90s. A gadol, I really feel. And he says it's important to talk to not only are non-Orthodox, I'm sorry, not only non-Jews, but non-Orthodox people. And in this little excerpt, which we won't read, just out of time, he says that he tried to convince the heads of Yeshiva University and some Orthodox leaders that it was important to talk to non-Orthodox leaders and to allow Orthodox students to interact with the Reform rabbi. And they say it's too dangerous. We can't do it. We can't do it. His response is, it's dangerous if we don't do it, because when our students encounter these ideas, these views, they may be tempted by them. They may be shocked by them. We should be talking to non-Orthodox Jews, and we don't have to, just as with secular knowledge and with non-Jews, we can interact with people and learn from them without endorsing their beliefs. We can interact with people. We can learn from people without endorsing their beliefs. That is, in my opinion, a modern Orthodox belief. Otherwise, you can't have a job in the secular world. Certainly can't go to college. You have to be constantly filtering as a modern Orthodox Jew if you're going to make it in the world. And Rav Yitz says it's okay. We can filter also with Reform and conservative Jews and theologians. And a lot of Orthodox leaders, even modern Orthodox leaders, say no. This is something I think that separates Skokie Valley, it's our ethos from some other parts of modern Orthodoxy, is that we think it's okay to talk to non-Orthodox Jews, and we've certainly collaborated with non-Orthodox organizations, and also, and this is key, Orthodoxy for a long time, for a very long time, it welcomed people who didn't live Orthodox lives. They would daven at an Orthodox shul, but they might not keep Shabbat. They might drive to shul, they might eat out, not keep kosher. And that was okay. That was okay. In the last, I don't know, 50 years, that has changed radically. Most modern Orthodox shuls, and certainly Haredi shuls, are not places where people come who are not Orthodox. And there's a gain there. There's more cohesion, but and there's less sort of distraction, questions, tensions of how you deal with people who aren't Orthodox. But I think there's a huge loss. And at Skokie Valley, there are people who do not practice Orthodox, who drive to shul. And we welcome them. We welcome them. Of course, we believe that and we want everyone to keep halakha, to be Shomer Shabbat Jews. But if you want to daven with us, we love that. We welcome it. And it's a kind of big tent Orthodoxy where people are welcome, even if they're not Orthodox. And we believe we can handle it. The Torah is strong enough to handle that. Our community is strong enough to handle people who are not Orthodox in lifestyle. And we love those people. We love those people too. I'm going to just share that I was deeply inspired in my own Orthodox journey by Rabbi Avram Magenzi, who's the rabbi of the Shtibel, the little shul I went to in St. Louis. And I don't know how much he would have identified explicitly as modern Orthodox, but I think something important to note is that you can believe in the values of modern Orthodoxy even if you don't call yourself modern Orthodox. I'm not sure how I feel, honestly, about that, about strictly identifying by that title. Jewish is probably a more worthy title in my mind, but I believe in the values of modern Orthodoxy. I think Rabbi Magenzi, who was a product of the old world of Europe, he was somebody who believed in the values of modern Orthodoxy, whether or not he would have identified as such. And there was a moment when I was young when a father and daughter entered our shul in St. Louis, and they sat down on the men's side at the back. Weren't many people in shul. This was a dying shul. And the older men started grumbling in Yiddish to themselves, but nobody said anything. They didn't say to the daughter, who was already past bat mitzvah age, you need to go sit on the women's side. And so when the rabbi, Rabbi Magenzi, this great man of the pre-war yeshiva world, he came around with the Torah during the Torah service. And when he saw this father and daughter, everyone was waiting to see what would he do. He gave a big hug to the father. He shook the daughter's hand and he kept moving. So my father, who was there at the time, asked him afterwards, Rabbi Mackenzie, very curious, what were you thinking there? And he said, they'll only be in an Orthodox shul once in their lives. Why should they leave with a bitter taste in their mouth? Why should they leave with a bitter taste in their mouth? That, I believe, was an articulation of this value that I'm talking about now. He didn't want to embarrass these people, and he didn't want them to feel negatively about Torah Judaism. So he found a way. I don't know what his halachic rationale was. I'm sure he had one. Found a way to not hurt them. Um, and I'm very inspired by that story. Very inspired by that story. And I'm not ruling on what we would do in the same case as Skokie Valley, but I'm just saying as an example, that's a symbol to me of a kind of orthodoxy that is caring about the people who are walking into shul and caring about people who don't practice in a halachic way necessarily, trying to find ways to be welcoming, never compromising on halacha, but seeing those people not as threatening, but as people to welcome. We're almost out of time. I'll just offer one more sort of plank or value of modern orthodoxy, and that is halachic creativity. Halachic creativity. We've talked about how we interact with the outside world. We've talked about how we interact with non-Orthodox Jews. Halachic creativity is another piece of this story. We saw at the very beginning of this year that the Haredim said, no creativity. There's one way. We're going to go with stringency, chumrah, and even little changes to little traditions, no way. In modern Orthodoxy, depending on who you ask, there is more openness to creativity within halacha. Not changing halacha, not being completely innovative, but being creative. So what am I talking about? The great articulator of this approach is Rabbi Eliezer Berkovitz, a man of Skokie Valley, who ran the Mechitza Minyan at Skokie Valley that has become Skokie Valley, who was a great theologian and a great master of halacha. And he believed that halacha should that halacha in exile, halacha of galut, had become too ossified, too dried out, shall we say, and that halacha was meant to be oral. It was meant to be oral, and then it was a great tragedy when it was written down. The Talmud says it was a tragedy when it was written down, when the Talmud was written down, when the Mishnah was written down. And he says it was also a tragedy when it got codified into the great codes of halacha that we know, like the Shulchan Aruch. He says the main body of the oral Torah was never meant to become a text, but it's become transformed into a kind of written Torah. He says people treat the Shulchan Aruch like it's as if they're Karaite. The Karaites say there's no oral Torah, there's just the written Torah. And he says we should not become Karaites of the written down oral Torah. What he means is that we have to remember all the opinions that are contained in halacha, all the tshuvot, all the flexibility, all of the minority opinions, and use those when needed, when we need to be creative, if there's real halachic dynamism that's needed. I'll just give one example that he mentions, which is that when he was a rabbi in Berlin, when the Nazis were coming, in the late 30s, he said someone came to him whose husband had become, his husband had gone into terrible psychosis. He had syphilis. He couldn't give her a get. She needed a get, and she didn't want to leave Berlin until she got her get. And no rabbi would take up her case. They were too scared. And he said, I was confused about what to do, and he lamented. He said, today I'm an older rabbi and I'm much more knowledgeable, and I would be willing to use halachic creativity within the halachic system to find a way to get her a get, to perhaps to annul her marriage in various ways. We're not going to get into details, but the point is that he said when there's deep human need and when it's emergency circumstances, the Nazis are in power, and if you keep staying in Germany, you're going to be killed. we have to find a way that the halachic system can react, and we may need to draw on uh, halachic creativity. And I would say that we'll talk more about halachic creativity in the next few sessions, but it's definitely something that, in my understanding, that Skokie Valley is deeply committed to halachic integrity, to following halacha, and to not changing as the reformers did, or even as conservative Judaism did, but to being open to finding ways to be halachically creative within the system when needed. And that just because something is new, that chadash is not aser min Torah, the newness is not forbidden from the Torah. Um, Changing halacha is forbidden from the Torah, but changing things that halacha says it's okay to change, that's okay. And again, we will dive deeper into this in the future sessions. I'll leave you here. We talked a lot about different aspects of modern Orthodoxy, about the development of modernity, the fog of modernity that washed over Judaism and radically changed it. And before I close, I'll just say there were some reactions to modernity we didn't talk about. Religious Zionism, which is deeply intertwined with modern Orthodoxy, depending on who you ask. But um, the Muslim movement, which focused on personal character development. The all of Chassidut, in a certain sense, the Hasidic movement was an early response to modernity. Um, there are many others, other Jewish responses. Of course, eventually we'll get Jewish socialists and other types of Jewish modernity. But for now, we've looked at Haredi Judaism a little bit, and the fact that they were a radical response to modernity. Reform, they are a violent, radical response as well. And modern Orthodoxy, which is a response to modernity. It is a change. Uh, Embracing emancipation, embracing the world to some extent, learning how to filter. But it's also authentic, I think. It's authentic to parts of pre-modern Judaism that have always existed. Dr. Tomer Persico, who's a modern thinker. He posted this on Facebook just a few days ago, and I think it encapsulates what we're trying to do or what we're trying to say here in this shiur. He says, I argue that the most important question a Jew can ask himself today is not whether God exists or does not exist, nor whether or not there was a revelation at Mount Sinai, but whether anything of significance has happened in the last few centuries. The question, in other words, is whether the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, historical consciousness, secularization, humanism, feminism, and the liberal order are essential and unprecedented developments in human history, or merely additional events along the chain of tribulations the Jewish people endure, random detours with no intrinsic uniqueness. He's saying, are these important? Do these matter? Is there something good in humanism, and yet even in secularization, separation of church and state, in feminism, in the liberal order? Are there good things in there? Are these radical revolutionary ideas that are worth taking seriously or not? We, as modern Orthodox Jews, we do believe that God exists. We do believe there was a revelation at Mount Sinai, but we also believe that something of great importance happened in the last few hundred years. And that secularization, humanism, feminism, and liberal order, these are not just little annoyances or even big annoyances that are all bad, but there can be good. There can be something sacred. There can be things we should learn from these developments. And to be a modern Orthodox Jew is to try to find the sacred in those. I leave you with the words of Rav Kook. Rav Kook points out that when the menorah was lit in the temple, it was always lit alongside the incense ceremony, the ketoret. And thus, as the light shone from the menorah, there would be a thick cloud of smoke. You might even say a fog that pervaded the temple. He says you couldn't really see the menorah. You could just see it glinting behind the fog. Sanctuary is not illuminated because of an impenetrable pillar of incense vapor. The distant star, it's like a distant star. It does not shed light, does not resolve enigmas or clear up mysteries. However, it does tell one story, namely that there is a light behind the vast and awesome cosmic drama. This is a great symbol for what it is to be a Jew in modernity, specifically a modern Orthodox Jew. He says, there is fog. There is a great fog of modernity. And the fog can be dangerous, the fog can be confusing. But we believe that behind the fog and in the fog, there is something sacred. There is light. There is divinity out there. And it could be scary to go into the fog. There may be costs, and we can talk more about those. But to be a modern Orthodox Jew is to not be afraid, or to even to be afraid, but to overcome that fear, to enter the fog of modernity, to look around and to find the sacred, to find the divine out there, to find the divine in the Enlightenment, in liberal democracy, in feminism, even in nationalism, in science, in astronomy, in the stars that we study through telescopes far away. And to say, there, even there in the fog, I can find godliness. Thank you.